Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel, Colonati. Today I'm going to talk about Growing Up Weightless by John M. Ford. This is a 1993 coming-of-age science fiction novel, kind of, I think, Ford's homage to Heinlein's juveniles of the 40s and 50s, but definitely with his own spin on it. I recently read this. It was actually a buddy read with my friend Joe from A Final Blow Joe, and it was our first time reading anything by John M. Ford, and this was a very interesting experience. I want to start off with two caveats. The first is that while I think this book is definitely in conversation with Heinlein's juveniles, I have never read those works and I have no intention of doing so. At this point in my life, I'm not interested in reading anything else by Heinlein, but I know enough about those stories to kind of get the references and the influence that they had on this book. The second thing is that this is the first thing I've ever read by John M. Ford, and I don't think he's very well known right now, but there's been quite a saga with his works coming back into print over the last few years. From what I gather, Ford was a very well-regarded, Renaissance man of the literary arts. He wrote quite a few speculative works that were very well received, but unfortunately after his death in 2006, it sounds like there were complications with his estate and all of his works rapidly disappeared and he's been mostly forgotten. The good news is that the issues with his estate seem to be resolved, and Tor is bringing all of his novels back into print one at a time, and in fact Growing Up Weightless is part of the Tor Essentials line, as well as his fantasy novel The Dragon Waiting, which is probably the next one I will read. So I can't say much about Ford as a writer at this point. I can't say much about his body of work, but after my experience with this book, I'm very excited to get to all of the other novels that are re-released so far. So with that, what is Growing Up Weightless about? This is, really simply put, definitely a young adult coming-of-age story. It is set on the moon in a very well-established lunar society, and it follows mainly two people. The protagonist of the story is Matt Roney, a very young teenager who is embarking on some major changes in his life. He and his group of very artistic, technologically savvy friends are planning on taking kind of a secret trip somewhere on the moon, and they've been planning it for a very long time, and they are hoping to do it without their parents being aware that they are going to be gone for like a week. Why are they doing this? What is the importance of it? I think that's one of the driving questions of this entire story. The other main character, in my opinion, is Matt's father, who is just referred to as Roney. He is a musician, he's a conductor, and he also sits on one of the major committees of the Lunar Society, the Water Committee. And in his perspective, we see some of the major events happening to the moon, the issues of getting enough water for people on the moon, dealing with corporations from Earth that are trying to get their claws into the society, just all of this stuff happening, these major threats to their society, to the home that they love. There's a lot about being somebody from the moon, not somebody from the Earth, just what that means. And both of these perspectives, Matt's story, what he goes through, the events that he sees, and then his father's story, they are different sides of the same coin. This is something I really liked about this book, actually, because upon reflection I realized that the strength of this as a coming-of-age story is that both perspectives, the child's and the adult's, are kind of about the same events, and they're both handled with equal gravity. You don't get the feeling that Ford is patronizing his younger character or diminishing his experiences. In fact, they are almost more important than some of the decisions that the adults are making about similar or related things. these life experiences are equally valid and important and influential. It's just one person is young and about to really begin his life, and another person is at a different stage of his life. There are, in my mind, two really distinctive things about this book. The first one is the point of view shifts. This book has no chapter breaks, there are very few section breaks, it is one long narrative, and the way that it shifts from person to person it's kind of like that technique you see in movies where you enter a scene with one person and then you exit with somebody else, and it's really seamless. It's hard to pick up on it the first couple of times. So we'll be in Matt's head, but then he'll go home and he'll have a scene with his father, and then when they move on from that, all of a sudden we're in Rone's head for the next bit. I think there are a couple of other people who get very short snippets, like Matt's mother and I think his acting coach as well, but they're kind of little blips in the story. It's mainly just Matt and Rone. And it was kind of strange at first. I didn't quite understand what was going on with the point of view shifts, but the more that it happened, the more I thought that was a really clever way of tying the whole story together, saying that there are no really strict boundaries between these people's experiences. It's all part of one big experience. The second thing that I think is very distinctive about the story, and may be brilliant or frustrating, is the world building. This novel is about 240 pages long. It's shorter than your average novel today, and it is jam-packed with incredible rich detail. I mean, you get the feeling that Ford just absolutely geeked out about developing this complex, really detailed lunar society, and then he never explains any of it. So it is packed with references to cities and geography and technology and events that are just, they're never explained. There's a lot of jargon you just have to understand from context, and it's a lot. Today, somebody who did this much world building would probably write an entire trilogy and like 1,000 pages to explain the whole thing. But here, Ford is just like, here you go, figure it out. And my experience with this is that I liked it. It was difficult. I think that the story was a little bit more opaque than it needed to be at points because a lot of this context wasn't explained very well. But at the same time, I appreciated it more and more because I do really like it when authors don't over-explain. And I think with genre fiction in particular, if you are used to this, some of that burden of figuring it out goes on the reader, and it becomes part of the experience of just reading the book and getting it. It's really rewarding. But it's just incredible how short the story is, but how much detail was created to enrich it. And I think for some people, if you were like a hardcore SF fan and you just like all this nitty-gritty detail and figuring it out on your own, this will be brilliant. But if you're new to this genre or you like more explanations, it could be very frustrating. There are two other things about Growing Up Weightless that I want to mention. The first is just kind of about the vibe of it. Like I said before, this is definitely Ford's like homage to Heinlein's juveniles of the 40s and 50s. And even though this was written in the 90s, it definitely has the flavor of something from like the golden age of SF. I can't really pinpoint where it is in the book, but there's just something about the story arc, about the coming of age arc, maybe some stuff about just how the lunar society is imagined. It felt a little bit old-fashioned, not bad, but I definitely felt that presence of like the history of SF in the story, and that's not like my favorite thing, but I can see where it would be brilliant if maybe you were super familiar with Heinlein's juveniles and stuff like that. There is only one thing about this book that I just did not connect with at all, and I will say right away, this is purely a matter of taste. But there are some very long sequences of fantasy role-playing immersion and theater acting, like theater experiences, because Matt is playing this really extended fantasy role-playing game with his friends. It's a huge part of their story and the trip that they take on the moon. And then he's also basically a theater kid, and one of the things that happens early on in the story is that he's basically offered like a trainee job, like his first real job, like the beginning of a career, from his acting coach in the beginning. And so these things are important. I think that they're included in the story because they really help show the things that are important to Matt and his inner life, and they are there in detail because they are important to developing his character and his interests and his personality, and in showing you how he's going to be making his decisions, what matters to him. But that being said, I really don't want to read many pages about teenagers play acting as Robin Hood and Maid Marian in a fantasy like Hollow game or something. This is not my favorite thing. I could definitely tell that Ford was probably like a theater kid and a band kid in real life. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I enjoyed, what I got out of this, and what I didn't connect with very much. That is it for this review, and definitely let me know if you have also read Growing Up Weightless, either recently or back in the day when it first came out. I would really like to know what people's thoughts are on this, and I will hopefully have some more reviews of Ford's novels in the future as I get to them. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.